Hello and welcome back to the Musical Instrument Investigator. Today we are on the website of Bromptons, fine and rare instrument auctioneers based in the UK, and we're going to have a look at their general sale, which has been running from the 1st to the 10th of September. It finishes tomorrow, which is the 10th of September. There's quite a lot of items in this sale, about 355 or so, mainly to do with kind of the bowed stringed family. Sometimes there's some other things. I don't think there's that much else in here, so without further ado, we'll just quickly go through it. And as it's finishing tomorrow, we'll see that there's a few bids on things. You can see 23 hours left. Oh, we've gone to lot 2. So yeah, we'll have a quick investigation. Maybe we should zoom out a little bit just so it's a bit easier. Yeah, and so 20% buyer's premium. Bromptons have the kind of first in, kind of last out thing, or they did before, where if you're the first person to bid, and then you'll also win it, then you get a bit of a reduction off the premium. I'm not sure if that's still going, but it was before. Yeah, and let's look through the auction and see what we have. So, an English silver mounted violin bow by James Tubbs. A German silver mounted violin bow by Albert Nürnberger. An English silver mounted violin bow, probably by John Dodd. And a German silver mounted violin bow by Alphonse Riedel. Few bids on that one. A German nickel mounted and engraved violin bow. Yeah, there you go, the buyer's premium is still there, 18% if you're the first to bid and you end up winning it. An English silver mounted violin bow by Michael Taylor, after taught. A German silver mounted violin bow by Albert Nürnberger. An interesting nickel mounted violin bow, possibly French. Interesting button on that one. A German silver mounted violin bow by Franz Winkler. A German nickel mounted violin bow by Karl Hofner. An English gold mounted violin bow by Michael Taylor for Ealing Strings, after taught. A German nickel mounted violin bow by Adolf Tauber. A German silver mounted violin bow by Emil Hermann. A German nickel mounted violin bow by August Edwin Prager. A German nickel mounted violin bow. An English gold mounted violin bow by Michael Taylor for Ealing Strings. A German gold mounted violin bow by Franz Shalipetsky. A 3/4 French nickel mounted violin bow, probably by a member of the Bazin family. An English silver mounted violin bow by W.E. Hills and Sons, estimate 4 to 600. Later frog, nickel ferrule. No bids on that so far. Interesting lines on the head. A German silver mounted violin bow by Arthur Thoma. German nickel mounted violin bow. An English silver mounted violin bow by James Tubbs. An English gold mounted violin bow by Michael Taylor for Ealing Strings. A lot of these Michael Taylor bows. An English silver mounted violin bow by W.E. Hills and Sons. No bids on that so far. A German silver mounted violin bow by Kurt Dolling. An English silver mounted violin bow by Michael Taylor for Ealing Strings. An English gold mounted violin bow by Michael Taylor for Ealing Strings. A German nickel mounted violin bow by Richard Weichold. A good silver mounted violin bow, probably a German. An English silver mounted violin bow by Richard Wilson. There's the original receipt as well. Good. Selection of random bows. An English silver mounted violin bow by James Tubbs. couple of bids on that. An English silver mounted violin bow by W. Hills and Sons. A German silver mounted violin bow by Matthias Thoma. A silver mounted violin bow by possibly French even. An interesting silver mounted violin bow, possibly French. A German silver mounted violin bow by Richard Gronk or Gronka. A French nickel mounted violin bow, workshop of Emile Francois Houchard with a Raffin certificate, 2021. A bundle of 4 bows. A bundle of 13 bows. A bundle of 10 various bows. Another bundle of 10 various bows. I don't think we need to look too much into the heads of that. Bundle of 8 bows. Bundle of 12 bows. A good English violin by William Luff, 1987, after Del Gesù. Length of back 355. 1 bid on that. That's good. An interesting violin, probably Italian, second half of the 18th century. 7 to 10,000 is the estimate. Certainly looks interesting. 0 bids on that so far. Cracks in table with patch. A good English violin, probably by a member of the Ferber family. London, 1811. 8 to 1200. There's no bids on that so far. A 3/4 German violin, circa 1900. An 8th size violin from China. An Italian violin by Alessandro Milani, Novara, 2013. 3 to 4,000, has the certificate of the maker there. An interesting violin, unlabelled, branded internally with a double-headed eagle. Interesting. 1 bid there, 1,500. A violin attributed to Albert Knorr, circa 1930. 10 bids on that. Interesting. A violin circa 1850. A violin. Got to love the vagueness of it. An interesting violin attributed to Fratelli Fischer, circa 1763. No bids on that so far. Interesting back. An English violin by A.J. Rope, Woolwich, 1908. A German violin, circa 1920. A violin, possibly German, circa 1920. A violin attributed to Giuseppe Desiato, Naples, second half of the 19th century. Some post cracking table with patch. An interesting composite violin, possibly Italian. No bids on that so far. It's a bit of a condition report there. An interesting violin, probably Tyrol, circa 1770, with a Testore label. 2 bids on that. An interesting violin attributed to Matthew Hardy, Edinburgh, 1820. 1 bid on that one. A violin. A German violin, possibly workshop of Neuner and Hornsteiner, circa 1880. A violin again. An Italian violin, probably by Giovanni Tedesco, Naples, circa 1920. No bids on that so far. A violin, workshop of Ernst Heinrich Roth, Bourbon Ruth, 1962. No bids on that so far. A violin, possibly French, circa 1900. A 3/4 size French violin, probably Calson School. A German violin, circa 1910. A Scottish violin by Williamson Blythe Berwick, circa 1880. No bids on that one. An Italian violin, School of David Tekla, 15 to 18,000 is the thing. Sold with certificate of Florian Leonhard from 2020. A good German violin attributed to Sebastian Klotz Mittenwald, 1750. 4 bids on that to 2,600. Looks interesting. Scroll possibly later. A French violin by Joseph Gaffino, Paris, 1750. 2 bids on that one. A violin attributed to Raphael Callis, Naples, circa 1925. 5 bids on that one. An interesting 3/4 violin. A French violin, Mirko, 1890. An Italian violin, probably by Antonio Ungarini Fabriano, circa 1750. 1 bid on that one. An Italian violin by Claudio Rampini, Pisa, 2002. No bids on that one. A violin. A violin, probably English, circa 1840. A French violin, probably Miracle, circa 1870. A violin. A violin, second half of the 19th century. An English violin by A.C. Council, Twickenham, 1949. Not too far from where I grew up, actually. Twickenham. So looks curious. 350. It's quite short. A violin. No bids on that one so far. Just have a quick back again. A Portuguese violin by Antonio Capella Espino, 1987. 4 bids on that. A Czech violin by Vladimir Pilar, 1982. 11 bids on that one. 4,500. That's popular. An English violin by Miles Doubleday for Ealing Strings, London, 1995. 1 bid on that. An English violin, probably by Charles and Samuel Thompson, London, circa 1770. Number of bids 13. Well, that's gone up to a good price. I saw this before and I thought this was actually a really nice looking instrument, so I think that will do very well. A German violin, circa 1880. A half-size German violin, circa 1900. An Italian violin by Agostino de Plantis, Genoa, 1757. No bids on that so far. It's an interesting shape. An Italian violin by Azzo Rovscali, Milan, circa 1920. Certificate of Florian Leonhard there. An interesting violin. A violin. A violin again. Another violin. A violin circa 1920. A German violin circa 1920. A very interesting violin. Labelled Andrea Guarneri. Fingerboard fitted by the Degani workshop. Interesting 1 bid there. An interesting violin ascribed to Johann Baptist Schweitzer, Pest, 1852. An interesting violin, probably by a member of the Hop family, circa 1800. No bids on that so far. A violin, a violin again, a German violin circa 1900, a violin first quarter of the 20th century. It's an interesting looking thing. It's got a few bids on that. A French violin workshop of JTL 1910. A Portuguese violin by Antonio Capella Espino 1979 after the Messiah Strad. 9 bids on that. That's a popular maker. An Italian violin by Alberto Denti Lodi 1989. This has certificates of Stefano Cornea and Cremona. 0 bids on that so far. A good and interesting violin after Gabrielli. No bids on that one so far. A French violin circa 1900. A French violin probably Miracle 1900. A 3/4 size violin, German violin circa 1920. A half-size German violin circa 1920. A violin by Vladimir Lutzek, Ukraine, 1982. So I don't often see Ukrainian-made violins, so that's quite interesting to see. An Italian violin by Dario Aguzzi, Pavia, 2013, with certificate of the maker. It's interesting, it's got 1 bid. An Italian violin by Dario Aguzzi, Vidigolfo, 2016, with certificate of the maker. No bids on that one so far. A violin first half of the 19th century. A violin circa 1830. A German violin probably by F.J. Koch, Dresden, 1929. A German violin circa 1920. An Italian violin by Federico Fiora in Cremona, 2010, with a certificate of the maker. A German violin attributed to Johann Michael Gotz, Marknenkirchen, circa 1800. 1 bid on that. Interesting scroll. A violin possibly French. A French violin Miracle, circa 1900. An interesting violin, probably German, circa 1900. It's got a curious varnish and scroll. Definitely interesting. 10 bids on that. A German violin. An English viola by Charles and Samuel Thompson, London, 1779. No bids on that so far. A contemporary Italian viola by Daniele Ranieri, Rome, 2019. And a good viola attributed to Gaetano Peresci, Ferrara, 1957. A French viola, probably Paris, first half of the 18th century. No bids on that one. And a good viola attributed to Michelangelo Castelli, 1909. Okay, looks interesting. And a viola. A French viola workshop of GATL, circa 1890. An interesting viola, probably Italian, first half of the 20th century. A contemporary Italian viola by Roberto Ignesti, Florence, 2016, after Ansaldo Poggi. An English viola by Frederick Daniel Mahoney, London, 1937. 0 bids on that. An English viola. No bids so far. Oh, 7 bids, sorry. A viola, probably German, circa 1880. An English viola by Eric Voigt, Manchester, 1952. An English viola by L.A. Perry, Wolverhampton, 1977. It's got a nice back on that. Very nice. Looks well made. An English viola by Harry Key, Staffordshire, 1990. A German viola, workshop of Roderick Paysold, Berdorf, circa 1990. An English viola by Paul Voigt, London, 1955. A viola, possibly English. That's some curious F-holes. A bit of a nasty button repair. Yeah, quite like it. 0 bids so far. A German viola by Karl Hofner, Bubenruth, 1991. An English silver-mounted viola bow by Michael Taylor for Ealing Strings. A German nickel-mounted viola bow by Franz Bergner. A German silver-mounted violin bow by Richard Weichold. A good silver-mounted viola bow, possibly Marcel Lapierre. An English silver-mounted viola bow by Roy Collins. Good nickel-mounted viola bow. A French ivory and silver-mounted viola bow by Jean Fritsch, circa 1940. Bit of a CITES warning there. A French silver-mounted viola bow by Francois Lotte. A German nickel-mounted viola bow by M. Walter Zapf. An Italian cello by Dario Aguzzi, Pavia, 2020. A German cello by Karl Wolf, Halle, circa 1890. A good cello. A cello first half of the 20th century. A German cello circa 1900. A good English cello, School of Kennedy, London circa 1840. An English cello, After Duke. 7 bids on that. An Italian cello by Dario Aguzzi, Pavia, 2019, with certificate of the maker. A cello by Marius Lorenz, Rehin, Romania. No bids so far. A good German cello, circa 1890. A German cello, probably by Paul Franke, Nuremberg, 1921. A German cello. A German viol, workshop of Peter Harlan, Kassel, 1932. A good double bass, probably School of Barb, circa 1860. A German double bass, circa 1910. An English silver-mounted cello bow by William Watson. A French silver-mounted cello bow, probably a member of the Bazin family. Swift silver-mounted cello bow, workshop of Finkel. A German silver-mounted cello bow by Hermann Wilhelm Prell. A contemporary silver-mounted cello bow by Arcus. A German nickel-mounted cello bow by Roderick Paysold. An English silver-mounted cello bow by Michael Taylor for Ealing Strings. We've got the Michael Taylor collection, I think, going on in this auction. An interesting nickel-mounted cello bow, possibly French. A German silver-mounted cello bow by Roderick Paysold. A German nickel-mounted cello bow. An English cello by Nigel Quinton, Hartlepool 2000, after William Forster. That's quite nice looking. No bid so far. A silver-mounted cello bow. A German silver-mounted cello bow. A German nickel-mounted cello bow by Roderick Paysold. A silver-mounted cello bow, possibly French. A bundle of 6 bows. An interesting nickel-mounted French-style double bass bow, possibly French. A good nickel-mounted French-style double bass bow. A German nickel-mounted French-style double bass bow by Conrad Gotz. 4 books, Benjamin Banks and some other ones there, that's good. Another 4 books, Stradivari book. Some more books about Italian lutherie, bow makers of the Pacat family there by Paul Childs. We've seen Scottish violin makers, David Rattray. Some more Cremonese violin makers, Dimitri Gilden. Michael Gorge oblong case, these are always popular for some reason. Well, they are really good, but they're very heavy. An oblong violin case by Gewa. Shaped wooden violin case, these are popular as well. 2 shaped and fitted English pressed oak violin cases by Hills and Sons. An oblong violin case. Another oblong violin case. Oblong double violin case. An English oblong double violin case by Michael Gorge again. A good English oblong violin case made for eating strings, probably by Michael Gorge. That one looks quite fancy. A shaped mahogany violin case by Hills and Sons. A flute by Gebruder Moning. A 6-keyed flute by John Willis, London, circa 1800. An Italian mandolin by Luigi Verga, Rome. An Italian mandolin by Vincenzo Vinaccia, Naples, 1776. 2 bids so far. This is a very nice instrument. These Vinaccia mandolins from that period, late 18th century, very nice instruments indeed. Very, very nice in terms of mandolins. That's very nice to see. Japanese guitar by Takamine Hirada, model 15, 1984. Just check the back there. An English silver mounted violin bow by W. Hills and Sons. So we're back into bows. German silver mounted violin bow by Heinz Dolling. A German nickel mounted bow workshop of Ludwig Bausch. A nickel mounted violin bow. Mounted violin bow. A good nickel mounted violin bow, possibly French. Silver mounted violin bow, attributed to and probably by John Dodd. French ivory and nickel mounted violin bow by a member of the Bazin family. Cites party there. German silver mounted violin bow, possibly a school of Knopf. Good silver mounted violin bow. Silver mounted violin bow, probably German. A German silver mounted violin bow. A German nickel mounted violin bow by Franz Sardner. A German silver mounted violin bow by Otto Derschmidt. A French silver mounted violin bow by Louis Morison Père, with a certificate of Gilles Chancerole, Paris. A French nickel mounted violin bow. A French nickel mounted violin bow. An English silver mounted violin bow by W.E. Hills and Sons. A German nickel mounted violin bow. A French nickel mounted violin bow. A French nickel mounted violin bow. An English silver mounted and tortoiseshell mounted violin bow by W.E. Hills and Sons. No bids on that so far. It's a bit worse for wear. An English gold mounted violin bow by Percy Bryant. 1 bid on that. A German silver mounted violin bow by Arnold Voigt. A modern nickel mounted violin bow. A French nickel mounted violin bow by Morison Frères, with a Raffin certificate from 2021. French silver mounted violin bow by Francois Lotte. A French nickel mounted violin bow, workshop of JTL. A French nickel mounted violin bow. A good French nickel mounted violin bow, school of Nicolas Malin. French silver mounted violin bow, Eugene Cunha-Huri. A French nickel mounted violin bow, workshop of JTL. French nickel mounted violin bow. An English silver mounted violin bow by James Tubbs. A French silver mounted violin bow, probably by Mars Auguste Husson. French silver mounted violin bow, probably by Emile Houchard. A French silver-mounted violin bow, possibly by Emile Auchard. A French silver-mounted violin bow. A bundle of 10 various bows. Some more various bows, more various bows, and some more bows, yet again more bows, more various bows, more bows. A good violin attributed to and probably by Giovanni Longiaro, New York, circa 1912. No bids on that. Nice back though. A good German violin, Mittenwald, second half of the 18th century. No bids. An interesting violin attributed to Vincenzo Postiglione. No bids on that one. A French violin, circa 1900. A violin attributed to Mario Garda, Mantua, 1978. With label and sold with certificate of Mario Garda. A violin attributed to Bruno Barbieri, Mantua, 1985. No bids on that so far. Violin attributed to Giovanni Cavani, Spilamberto, 1902. A few bids on that. A good violin, probably French. A violin, probably French, circa 1880. A violin, probably German, circa 1900. An interesting violin, possibly English, circa 1850. One bid on that. An interesting violin by Angelo Bontempo, Venice, 1971. An English violin by Jacob Ford, London, circa 1760. We seem to have lost the back picture there. Oh no, the back picture is back. And it has a letter from Hills and Sons. I regret that I can that I cannot agree with you that it has anything to do with Tekla. It is an English violin made by Jacob Ford. Interesting. A good bit of history there. A German violin, circa 1900. A German violin by Louis Lowendahl, Dresden, 1885. A German violin, circa 1910. An English violin by Thomas Earl Hesketh, Manchester, 1929. With the certificate, 8 bids on that. It's quite popular. A violin, possibly School of Grandjean, last quarter of the 19th century. A French violin, workshop of JTL. A German violin, made for Beer & Sons, London, circa 1900. One bid on that. A fine German violin, School of Hornsteiner, Mittenwald, first half of the 19th century. A good German violin, attributed to and probably by Fritz Arnold Bruckner, Marknenkirchen, 1927. A violin, probably French, circa 1910. A violin, probably German, made for Beer & Sons, London, circa 1920. An English violin, first half of the 19th century. A violin by Ottokar František Spidlin, Prague, circa 1935. A few bids on that. An English violin by William Luff, London, 1978. That's one bid on that. A 3/4 size English violin by John Johnson, London, circa 1750. A German violin, circa 1870. A violin attributed to Johannes Baptist Havelaar, Vienna, 1938. A few bids on that. A violin. An English violin, circa 1865. No bids on that. An English violin by Emmanuel Whitmarsh, London, 1908. An English violin, circa 1890. A violin. A French violin, circa 1890. A Russian edgeless violin by Rigut Rubis, St. Petersburg, circa 1915. An English violin by William Robinson, in fact, London, 1919. A violin circa 1900. A good French violin, probably Paul Bailey, circa 1870. A French violin. A good French violin, Miracle, 1890. An Italian violin by Marco Maria Gastaldi, Cremona, 2003. Certificate, no bids yet. A German violin by Willy Goth, Heidholzen, 1973. Violin, possibly Italian, circa 1980. A French violin, possibly casting school, circa 1880, after Guadagnini. A German violin, circa 1925. A German violin attributed to August Diehl, Hamburg, 1911. A three-quarter size French violin made for Beer & Sons, London, circa 1915. A French violin attributed to and probably by Charles J.B. Colin Mazarfil, Paris, 1897. A violin. A violin again. A good violin attributed to Gustav Wilhelm Nazi, 1931. That's popular. A violin, probably English, first half of 20th century. A German violin, circa 1880. No bids on that. A French violin by Amédée Dodone, Miracle, 1937. A French violin attributed to Juste Derézy, Miracle, 1880. A French violin by Hugues-Émile Blondelet, Paris, 1922. Sold with original guarantees from the workshop. Interesting. A German violin, circa 1890. A violin. An English violin by Joseph Allwood, London, circa 1790. Zero bids on that so far. A German violin by Franz Placht, Schonbach, 1786. No bids on this so far. A good three-quarter size violin, probably French, circa 1870. A Scottish violin by John Marshall Aberdeen, 1895. 9 bids on that. A German violin, probably by Carl Anton Lippold, Marknenkirchen, 1927. A German violin, circa 1890. A German violin, circa 1870. A French violin, Paris, circa 1880. Sold with a receipt from Oxford Violins. An Interesting Violin, probably English, second half of 20th century. A German violin, Mittenwald, circa 1890. A violin, possibly English. A violin, it's got 17 bids, it's quite interesting. An Italian violin by Luigi Lanaro, Padua, 1977. An English violin by William Robinson, Plumstead, 1920. Sold with receipt of purchase from the maker, so that's quite cool. A German violin, circa 1910. A violin, probably Mircore, circa 1890. A violin. A 7/8 violin, which looks quite interesting. 2 bids so far on that. An Italian violin by Giorgio Corsini, Rome, 1979. Nice back on that. 3 bids and a certificate from K Days. Italian violin by Felix Rutaru, Cremona, 2008. An English violin by Harry Key, Staffordshire, 1991. One bid on that. An English violin by Ernst Jacot, London, 1963. A violin, English or German, circa 1900. Curious. A German violin, circa 1880. A violin, probably Miracle, circa 1920. And an interesting violin attributed to Giuseppe Fioroni, Munich, 1913. 2 bids on that. So that is it. That is the whole of the Bromptons catalogue, which ends tomorrow on the 10th of September. Quite an interesting auction, actually. Surprised that there was no Perry violins from Dublin, because there usually are some. Lots of new stuff I've not seen before, so that's good. Yeah, an interesting auction. Some really cool things in it, actually. Yeah, quite impressed actually with this auction, so it's good. So yeah, I'll put a link in the description, and if you're interested, check it out. So once again, thanks for watching, and ciao for now. Bye. Many thanks for tuning in to the Musical Instrument Investigator. I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, then please like, subscribe and turn on notifications, and watch out for the next video coming soon.